Hey RVF family, I pray that your Holy Week and your Easter Sunday was a good experience for you. Obviously it was different than what we've ever experienced before, but I know for my family and I, even though we were really disappointed to not get to spend time with you guys on Sunday morning worshiping together or on Good Friday, we also found that we had unprecedented time for family worship and hanging out with one another, and we found some real joy there. And so I pray that you also are finding joy in unexpected places and in unexpected ways in times that are unprecedented and strange for all of us. Moving forward, I'm going to kind of revamp the format of how we do these videos and how you guys reflect on the sermon or a concept. And so to get started this week, I want you to just spend some time talking with one another about how you're doing, what's going on in your lives, and then spend time praying for our world and for one another. And when you come back, we will jump into our discussion topics for the day. So if you haven't yet listened to Sunday's sermon, go ahead and head over to the church website and listen to that. It'll be helpful for you as we reflect and discuss. The sermon this past Sunday was on the resurrection, of course, on Easter Sunday, but it came from Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 through 20. Kenner started talking about how in all four Gospels, in normal stories, when the main character dies, the story's over and it ends. But in all four Gospels, none of them end with the crucifixion of Jesus. They all have another chapter. The story goes on, and all four gospel accounts give witness and testimony to the reality of Jesus' resurrection, and the rest of the New Testament is written to help us understand the implications and meanings of the resurrection for us and for our world and for who Jesus actually is. And so in the New Testament, we see that the resurrection authenticates Jesus' identity, it proves the work of the atonement, and it assures us of the resurrection that is to come. In fact, we see in the New Testament that the resurrection is actually the hinge on which our faith swings. If the resurrection is not real, our faith is futile. And so in Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 through 20, Paul gives us some really solid Christological teaching in light of the resurrection. Because Jesus is alive, this is who Jesus is, this is what he's doing, and this is what it means for us. And so we see in this passage that Jesus is supreme in creation. He's the image of the invisible God. He's the Lord of creation, and he sustains creation. And yet, even though Jesus sustains all things and is above all things, because of our rebellion, our turn away from God and towards ourselves, the world has been plagued by sin and death and disease, and destruction is all around us. However, in light of the reality of the fallen world, we see that Jesus isn't just the agent of creation, but he's the agent of new creation. And in verses 18 through 23, we see Jesus as the head of the church, the firstborn from among the dead, meaning the resurrection is a real thing that we can expect will happen for all people, that his kingdom has started and will be completed at his return, and that we are actually included in resurrection renewal, both now and in the future. And so we see that Jesus is the agent of creation and new creation. Jesus has risen and his new world has begun, and we are new creations. Jesus will come again one day and complete his work of resurrection. So this week, for our discussion questions, I want to focus in on the reality that the resurrection is ushering in new creation. A new world is already being made by the power of the resurrection as we wait for it to be completed at Christ's return. We actually are invited into this resurrection life. God has asked us to partner with him in ushering in new creation, ushering in his new world, a good world that is ruled by peace and shalom and goodness. And so what does all that mean for us? The reality of the resurrection power that's already at work, God's invitation to us to join him in this work of renewal. What are the implications for us and even the times that we find ourselves in? And so with that, here's question number one. how do we see new creation being ushered into our world right now? And how do we understand events like the current pandemic in relationship to new creation and resurrection? So spend some time discussing that. So I think it's important for us to recognize that we may not be able to answer why things like this happen, or even the answers that we do have oftentimes feel emotionally not very satisfying. However, we do know that ultimately disease, death, and heartache are not a part of God's good world when He returns. And so we live with sure hope that all of these things will end, and yet we can embrace the reality of the pain that a fallen world holds for us and our fellow humans. So question number 2 is this. I want you to read 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 7 through 18, and then answer these questions. How has our current circumstances revealed the weakness of the flesh within you? And secondly, how has the Spirit revealed His power and strength in your life through your weakness? Or maybe how would you desire to see Him do that if you're not sure how that's happening right now? So take some time to discuss those things. So as we partner with God in ushering in His new creation, our limitations and weaknesses will become ever more apparent. And yet we are assured that the Spirit is strong in us regardless of the weakness that we may carry. And with that truth in mind, that the Spirit is strong in our weakness, here's our last couple questions for this week. First, how can we be vessels of new creation and resurrection power, specifically in a time of quarantine and pandemic? And secondly, what does meaningful engagement of the world and our neighbors look like at this time? What does meaningful engagement of our world and our neighbors look like in this time? Go ahead and discuss those things. Now, that question may have been difficult or even frustrating to answer because as far as the actions we can do, we probably feel quite inhibited by the reality of quarantine. However, I want us to realize that this is not just about what we do, but it's also about a heart posture and a way of being. And so even understanding the implications of the Spirit being strong in us for how it helps us to engage intellectually and emotionally with our world as it is hurting and broken, are ways that we can engage this world in a difficult time. So with that, why don't you spend some time again praying with one another, ask the Spirit to help us live in resurrection power, and in particular, ask the Spirit to give us insight and wisdom about what it means to live with resurrection power and hope in difficult and trying circumstances. Okay, RVF, this coming Sunday, we're going to be in John chapter 6, verses 1 through 21. Feel free to spend some time reading and reflecting on that passage and preparing yourself to learn and worship on Sunday morning. And again, as you may have needs or prayer requests that come up, we would love to know what's going on with you. Send us an email at info@rvfchurch.org. Shoot us a text, give us a call. We want to know what's happening. We want to be able to pray for you. We want to be able to try to assist you in any material needs you may have or other types of things that come up. So we want to be involved even though we are still physically distant from one another. We love you. God bless you. Grace and peace.